specifics. Mr. Zuckerberg, October 10th, Detroit Free Press reported 13 men charged Thursday in a conspiracy to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer used Facebook and secure messaging apps to connect and plot their attack. The group's use of Facebook spans almost a full year. Members began to use the social media platform as a recruitment tool in November 2019, according to an affidavit by Brian Russell, Detective Sergeant, Michigan State Police. Once recruited, members communicated via a secured encrypting message platform. According to news reports, Facebook alerted the FBI about the Michigan kidnappers' online activity several months before the arrest. Thank goodness. However, in August, a Facebook page for the Kenosha Guard militia, which advocated violence in the aftermath of the shooting of Jacob Blake, was reportedly flagged over 455 times to Facebook. However, the page was deemed non-violating and left up. More than 4,000 people responded to that event. Hundreds of armed militia members showed up. A member of this group, a teenager from Illinois, later shot and killed 2 people on the streets of Kenosha. Mr. Zuckerberg, you described Facebook's handling of this militia page as an operational mistake. Can you explain the exact reason why the Kenosha militia page was not taken down?
Senator, yes. And first, what happened in Kenosha was obviously terrible. What happened here was we rolled out a strengthened policy around militia pages in general. Whereas before that, we would have allowed a group that was a militia as long as it wasn't planning or organizing violence directly. In the lead up to the election, we strengthened the policy to disallow more of those groups because we were on high alert and we're treating this situation as very volatile around potential civil unrest around the election. We just put that policy into place, and for a number of reasons, it had not yet been fully rolled out, and all of the content reviewers across the company hadn't been fully trained on that. So we made mistakes in assessing whether that group should be taken down. But upon appeal, when it was escalated to a more senior level of content review folks who have more specific expertise in these areas, we recognized that it did violate the policy, and we took it down. It was a mistake. It was certainly an issue, and we're debriefing and figuring out how we can do better. Although one other piece that I would add is that the person who carried out the shootings was not in any way connected to that page or linked to any of the content there from anything that we or others can tell.
Mr. Chairman, if I could ask one more question. Yesterday, the FBI released its annual hate crime incident report. The report found that more people were killed in hate-motivated violence in 2019 than any year since the FBI began collecting hate crime data in 1990. The report also found that race-based hate crimes remain the most common type of hate crimes last year, and documented increase in religion-based hate crimes, anti-Hispanic hate crimes, and hate crimes targeting individuals based on gender identity. Given these statistics, it appears to me that it's more important than ever for social media companies to combat hate on their platforms. And I might add to one of my colleagues who stated earlier, this is not Antifa, but these are documented hate crimes from FBI. Muslim advocates, Muslim have reached out to you many times, Mr. Zuckerberg, about this issue relating to published content that reflects on certain religious groups. And you said at a hearing, you do not allow hate crimes on Facebook. Yet in May 2020, the Tech Transparency Project found more than 100 American white supremacist groups, many of them explicitly anti-Muslim, active on the platform both on their own group pages as well as auto-generated content. Facebook did nominally alter some of the content, but the hate groups largely remained. Are you looking the other way, Mr. Zuckerberg, in a potentially dangerous situation?
No, Senator. This is incredibly important, and we take hate speech as well as incitement of violence extremely seriously. we banned more than 250 white supremacist organizations and treat them the same as terrorist organizations around the world. And we've ramped up our capacity to identify hate speech and incitement to violence before people even see it on the platforms. Our AI and human review teams, you can track our results in the transparency reports that we issue, now take down about 94% of the hate speech that we find on our platforms before anyone has to even report it to us, which is a dramatic amount of progress from where we were a few years ago, where when we were just starting to ramp up on this, we're taking about 20% of it down before people had to report it to us. So there's still more progress to make. We're very invested in this, and you have my commitment that we view this as an issue of the highest severity and one that we are very focused on.
Thank you very much.
Senator Sens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for hosting this hearing. Clearly important topics around content moderation. I'm a skeptic of the content moderation policies that exist, both because I don't think the standards are very transparent and I don't think the execution is very consistent. That said, I'm more skeptical than a lot of my colleagues, I think on both sides of the aisle, about whether or not there's a regulatory fix that will make it better instead of worse. I especially think it's odd that so many in my party are zealous to do this right now when you would have an incoming administration of the other party that would be writing the rules and regulations about it. And I think it's telling that a number of folks on the other side of the dais, I think of Senator Blumenthal, a guy I like, but who seemed to almost be giddy about the prospect of a new government regulatory agency to police online speech. And I think a lot of people on my side should take pause at the idea that so many on the other side of the aisle are excited about having the next administration get to write these rules and regulations. But to the broader question, first, just to get to kind of a level set, and I want to thank both the witnesses for being here today. But when Senator Lee lays out some of the issues he did about, just every human community is going to be situated in a different place about policy commitments and priorities and beliefs. But when Senator Lee said that 93% of Facebook employees who contribute to politics do so on the left, and 99%, I think it was, of Twitter employees contribute on the left, I would just be interested to see if either of the two of you think that has implications in the shepherding of your organizations. Again, I recognize fully that you're private organizations, and so again, I'm more skeptical of a governmental fix for a lot of the problems we're talking about here today. But I'm curious as to whether or not Mr. Zuckerberg and Mr. Dorsey, and I guess we'll start with Facebook, I'm curious as to whether or not you think it's likely that there is systemic bias inside your organization in the execution of content moderation policies, given that your employee base is so unrepresentative of America in general.
Senator, I think it's a good question, and certainly I think it means that we have to be more intentional about what we do and thoughtful. Our principle and goal is to give everyone a voice and to be a platform for all ideas. As you mentioned, I do think it's undisputed that our employee base, at least the full-time folks, politically would be somewhat, or maybe more than just a little somewhat, to the left of where our overall community is, where the community basically spans almost wide varieties of people across society. So I do think that means that we need to be careful and intentional internally to make sure that bias doesn't seep into decisions that we make. Although I'd point out a couple of things. One is that people have a lot of different views outside of work, and we expect and I think generally see that people conduct themselves professionally. And second, the folks who are doing the content review work, we have about 35,000 people doing content review, are typically not based in Silicon Valley. They're based in places all over the country and all over the world, because we serve people in countries all over the world. So I think that the geographic diversity of that is more representative of the community that we serve than just the full-time employee base in our headquarters in the Bay Area.
Thanks, Mr. Zuckerberg. Mr. Dorsey?
Yeah, this is obviously not something we interview for, and even have an understanding of when people are in the company, and with that understanding, we intend to make sure that both our policy and our enforcement is objective. And I realize that it looks rather opaque, and certainly the outcomes might not always match up with that intention, with our intention, and the perception of those outcomes may not match up. But that's why I think it's so important that we're not just transparent around our policies, but the actual operations of our content moderation. If people don't trust our intent, if people are questioning that, that's a failure. And that is something that we need to fix and intend to fix. And I think it would benefit the industry as well. But I do, again, point back to something I said earlier on the testimony, which is a lot of these decisions are not being made by humans anymore. They're being made by algorithms. And that's certainly enforcement decisions, but also decisions around what you see or what you don't see. And to me, that is the body of work. That is the conversation that we should be focused on, because that is the enduring use case for everyone who interacts with these services.
Thank you, and I wish it were true that these were all easy, objective questions. That the questions were, if somebody says, "Is the sky green?" That's an objective question. That the sky is blue and white, not green. But most of the things we're talking about here, and the places where you're applying content moderation labels, are not really simply objective questions. They're mostly subjective questions. If we talked about Medicare for all being, easily paid for inside a 10-year budget window on assumptions X, Y, and Z that don't raise taxes, that's not true. There isn't any math by which Medicare for all pays for itself in some short-term window. But I don't think any of us really think you're going to slap a label on that saying this is disputed, accounting or math or policy projections. And so really what's happening is there's a prioritization grid that people are going through as they build even the algorithms, even those that aren't driven by humans, and they're driven by policy priorities of situated individuals. I may be wrong about this, but my suspicion is that your employee base is not actually 99% left of center. I bet it's less than that. And I would speculate that part of the reason less than 1% of your employees give money to candidates on the right is because there's a social stigma attached to having conservative views inside your organization. And I would guess that those same sort of internal cultural biases inform the subjectivity of which issues end up labeled. So again, this is sort of an odd place to be in that I am skeptical that the content moderation policies are thought out well. They're not transparent enough for us to really know, but I'm definitely skeptical that they're consistently applied. And yet I'm not really on the side of thinking there's some easy governmental fix here. There's a lot about Section 230 that we could debate. I think some of the things Senator Durbin said about how in the era of telephones, nobody blamed the phone company for other people having spread misinformation by the phone. Exactly, that's what would be the case if Section 230 were actually neutral, but you're applying content moderation policies and seemingly in a way that's not objective. So I know that I'm nearly at time, but I think it would be useful for us to hear from both of you to give a sort of 3 or 5 year window into the future. If there isn't new legislation, what is changing besides just saying we're moving from humans to more AI? What qualitatively is changing in the way content moderation happens inside your organizations, short of a new regulatory scheme? Can you tell us where you think you're actually improving and what problems you're trying to solve? Mr. Zuckerberg, you first, please.
Senator, one of the areas that we're very focused on is transparency, both in the process and in the results. So we're already at the point where every quarter we issue a community standards enforcement report that basically details the prevalence of each category of harmful content and how effective we are at addressing it before people have to even report it to us. Over time, we would like to fill that out and have more detail in that and make it more robust. We've already committed to an independent external audit of those metrics that people can trust them even more. people have lots of different kinds of requests for where we might go with that in the future. Whether that's breaking down the stats by country or language or into more granular buckets, adding more data around precision. But I think that would all be very helpful so that people can see and hold us accountable for how we're doing. And for what it's worth, I think that would be a valuable part of a regulatory framework that would not feel particularly overreaching to me, is something that could be put in law that would create an apples to apples framework that all companies in this space would have to report on the outcomes and effectiveness of their programs in that way, so at least we can see how everyone is doing. That seems like a sensible step to me.
Thank you, Mr. Dorsey.
Senator Whitehouse.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Dorsey, still answering the same question, and then I'll get it back to you in a hurry, Mr.
So
Lay.
sorry, I missed that.
It's a junior acting chairman, Mr. Dorsey.
Thank you. Well, I mean, if we're considering 3 to 5 years out, I think the realization that a centralized global content moderation system does not scale, and we need to rethink how we operate these services. And I would point to, we certainly need transparency around any process that we have and around the practice and the outcomes of those moderations. But I think having more control so that individuals can moderate themselves, pushing the power of moderation to the edges and to our customers and to the individuals using the service is something we'll see more of. And I also believe that having more choice around how algorithms are altering my experience and creating my experience is important. So being able to turn off ranking algorithms, being able to choose different ranking algorithms that are found, written by third-party developers and somewhat of an algorithmic marketplace